In this video, I'm going to be explaining what is Ethereum, so that even if you are a complete beginner and have zero understanding of Ethereum, by the end of this video, you should understand what it is and how it works. Most people vastly misunderstand what Ethereum is. Even a lot of the people that are heavily involved in the crypto space seem to these days really misunderstand what Ethereum has become and how it works today. Ethereum, in my mind, can be broken down into 4 different parts. And at first, if you're a complete beginner, this might sound really confusing, but I promise I'm going to go into each part and break it down so that you understand it. The first part would be what I call the core of Ethereum, or Ethereum's layer 0. This is what makes up essentially the core security of Ethereum. And this is used for different things like eigenlayer and restaking and things that we're going to get into a little bit later in the video. Second, there's Ethereum's layer 1 blockchain, and this is probably the piece of Ethereum that most people are really familiar with. Ethereum's layer 1 blockchain is debatably the most secure and decentralized blockchain on the planet. And built on top of this blockchain are a ton of things called dApps, or decentralized apps, and they allow you to do all sorts of things, again, that we'll get into a little bit later. And this is the piece of Ethereum, the Ethereum layer 1 blockchain, that people are talking about when they say that Ethereum has really high fees, or it's really expensive to use. And you can vaguely think of blockchains as sort of like a different version of the internet. So we talk about going online a lot when it comes to the internet, right? Like you go online to go on a website or whatever. Well, when it comes to blockchains, we talk a lot about going on chain. So you go on chain to transact or to use a dApp or different things like that. So you can vaguely think of blockchains as sort of like a different version of the internet. The third piece of Ethereum is its layer 2 blockchains. You may have heard of different chains like Base, Arbitrum, Optimism, ZK Sync, Scroll, etc. These are all layer 2 blockchains that are built on top of Ethereum's layer 1 blockchain. And where Ethereum's layer 1 can be really expensive to use, Ethereum's layer 2s are just pennies to use. They're really, really cheap to use. Lastly, the final part or piece of Ethereum is ETH The Asset. The actual token, ETH, plays a huge role in what is the overall picture of Ethereum. And that's because it has some amazing monetary properties that, in my opinion, make it a better store of value and a better form of money than even something like Bitcoin. And we're gonna dive into all 4 of these different pieces of Ethereum to give you a comprehensive overview of what Ethereum is. To start out, let's dive into Ethereum's layer 1 blockchain. As I just mentioned, Ethereum's layer 1 blockchain is maybe the most secure and decentralized blockchain on the face of the planet. And it has tons of these things called dApps, or decentralized apps, that are built on top of it. And these apps can do all sorts of things, ranging from decentralized exchanges like Uniswap, where you can buy and sell crypto tokens, similar to something like Coinbase, but with a lot more tokens. And instead of being run by a company, it's run by trustless code. And a fact that I think most people that aren't aware of the space find pretty mind-blowing is that Uniswap has had trillions of dollars in volume done on the platform. There are also other dApps that are lending and borrowing platforms that allow you to take out a loan against your crypto or lend it out for some extra yield. There are things like stablecoins, which allow you to send value all over the world in just seconds. A fact that I literally can't get over and I find really crazy and insane is that stablecoins are the 16th largest holder of US treasuries on the planet. They hold more US treasuries than some countries like Australia or South Korea. There are NFT marketplaces that allow people to trade digital collectibles. Think of how baseball cards can be worth millions and millions of dollars, even though they're just essentially printed on pieces of cardboard. It's kind of like that, but with digital assets. And outside of that, there's literally an entire universe of these different dApps that you can use on the Ethereum blockchain. I like to think of Ethereum's layer 1 blockchain as sort of like the central hub for the on-chain economy. However, a lot of people complain about Ethereum's layer 1 blockchain because it can be really expensive to use. A single transaction on Ethereum's layer 1 blockchain could cost you anywhere from $5 to $300 or more. This, of course, vastly limits the use cases that you can see on Ethereum's layer 1 blockchain. However, this is kind of by design. The goal of Ethereum's layer 1 blockchain is to be the most secure, the most decentralized, and the most credibly neutral blockchain on the planet. Imagine major Wall Street companies coming on chain and transacting with hundreds of millions of dollars, or billions of dollars, or trillions of dollars. When you're moving around that much money, you're going to care a lot less about the fees, and you're going to care a lot more about the security, the credible neutrality, and the decentralization of this platform. For example, imagine for a second the internet. The internet is owned by nobody, and it's also kind of owned by everybody. Anyone can go and build a website on the internet and know that they own that website. They have sort of like these digital property rights, and that they can own a piece of digital real estate in the form of their website. This is really important for companies like Amazon when they build their website, that nobody can come and be like, hey, we're going to take your website away from you. Or we're going to change the rules of the internet and now your website doesn't work. It's really important that there's sort of like these digital property rights around websites. And in order to have real property rights on a blockchain, you have to have true credible neutrality, which is essentially the same thing as the internet, where no one person or company controls that blockchain. And despite blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum literally holding hundreds of billions of dollars, neither one of them has ever been hacked. There has been hacks of crypto apps built on top of these blockchains. So if a dApp built on top of Ethereum holds $100 million of funds in a certain smart contract, if they have a flaw in their code, maybe that smart contract could get hacked and they could lose their money that they're holding. But the blockchains themselves as a whole have never been hacked. They've never been compromised. So Ethereum's layer 1 is considered really decentralized, really credibly neutral, and really secure. And that's why today we're seeing companies like BlackRock put hundreds of millions of dollars onto Ethereum's layer 1. And of course, these companies don't mind at all when they're moving hundreds of millions of dollars around, paying a $10 to $50 fee. They're in fact happy to pay for this extra security and trust. Okay, to summarize, Ethereum's layer 1 is built to be bulletproof. It sacrifices on speed and cost to ensure that it's decentralized and secure. You can think of Ethereum's layer 1 as sort of like the Fort Knox of crypto chains, leading it to be a place where a lot of the crypto whales, or if you don't know what crypto whales means, it just means investors who have a lot of capital. A lot of those people tend to not care about the fees, and they tend to do a lot of transactions on Ethereum. And crypto whales includes large investors, that includes companies like BlackRock, that includes really big crypto projects and maybe have large treasuries, as well as there's another entity that uses Ethereum's layer 1, and that's Ethereum's layer 2 blockchains. Ethereum's layer 2 blockchains are built on top of Ethereum's layer 1. They use Ethereum's layer 1 security so they don't have to launch and create their own. Anthony Sazzano gave a really great analogy on this. Think of Ethereum as essentially the United States, and Ethereum's layer 2s would be the states. States don't have to have their own security. Instead, they get security directly from the federal government. As in, if another country comes and invades the United States, it's not up to, states like California or states like Texas to have their own standing armies to combat, this invasion. That's kind of how Ethereum layer 2s work. They use Ethereum's layer 1 security instead of having to launch their own. And this is actually really important because most blockchains are actually incredibly unprofitable. That is, they have to continually print new tokens to pay their validators to keep them securing the network. If you're sort of familiar with how Bitcoin miners work, this is a really similar concept. The Bitcoin network rewards Bitcoin miners by paying them out Bitcoin. And Bitcoin miners are the ones that secure the Bitcoin network. In the exact same way, all blockchains have different validators that they have to pay in order to incentivize them to secure the network. And they pay these validators in their own native token by printing more and more of their token. Think of it sort of as a business that only earns or only makes a profit of $1,000 a day, but has to spend $10,000 a day on their credit card just to keep the business open. Obviously, long term, that business has to figure something out or else that business is going to collapse. Most blockchains today are exactly like that, with the exception of Ethereum's layer 1. It produces over $4 billion in annual revenue and only has to pay a tiny portion of that to actually have its validators secure the network. Well, layer 2s are incredibly unique and have a massive advantage because they inherit the security from Ethereum's layer 1. So they don't have to print a bunch of tokens and pay them out to all these validators because they're just using the security from Ethereum's L1. That means it's really easy as an Ethereum layer 2 to become profitable pretty quickly. And a lot of them are profitable today. Security is essentially the single largest expense for most blockchains, and layer 2s literally don't have to pay for it. For users, layer 2s are really great because they're really cheap. They're typically pennies for a single transaction or sometimes sub a penny. And layer 2s benefit Ethereum in a couple different ways. First off, they pay fees to Ethereum. So when people use layer 2s, a portion of the fees that are spent on that layer 2 go down and are paid to Ethereum, the layer 1. Secondly, and in my opinion, far more important, is that most layer 2s use ETH as their native gas token. And we'll get into why that's so incredibly important a little bit later when we talk about ETH the asset. Thirdly, layer 2s allow Ethereum to experiment and take risks and expand and try new things without compromising Ethereum's layer 1 and what makes it so amazing. Layer 2s can choose a wide variety of risk assumptions and like different ways to build themselves that Ethereum's L1 literally never could do because it would just be inherently too risky. Again, if you want hundreds of billions of dollars or maybe trillions of dollars to be on a blockchain, it's got to have a really solid track record of being secure, decentralized, incredibly neutral. And obviously, if you're rapidly changing and experimenting with it, that introduces a lot of risk to that blockchain. Now, it's important to note that Ethereum's layer 2s are permissionless, meaning anyone could go build an Ethereum layer 2, and it could be a really good L2 or it could be a really, really bad L2. This is sort of similar to Apple's App Store in some ways. Back in the day when it came to cell phones came preloaded with whatever apps the company determined should be on that cell phone. Well, the Apple App Store came out and they said, hey, literally anyone could build an app for this cell phone. And some of those apps that came out were amazing. They were revolutionary. Other apps that came out were duds or in some cases outright scams. Now, maybe the biggest critique of Ethereum layer 2s is that they do this thing called fragmenting liquidity. Basically, people think it's really annoying to have to bridge between different blockchains. I myself also think this is a really annoying thing to do. And in their mind, wouldn't it be better if everything was just on one single blockchain? And obviously that's a crazy cool goal. However, there are a few things worth noting. First off, the early internet sort of had the same kind of concept where you had sites like AOL that thought they were going to be like a super internet site where users would come and essentially live on AOL, and that would be all they would really need to access when it came to the internet. They could do their email, they could read the news, they could check the weather, and everything that people did on the internet back then, but on one single website rather than having to go to all these different websites. So the thought was back then, obviously, that a single generalized website would beat out a ton of different specialized websites. Obviously, today we have the benefit of knowing that that didn't quite work out. It turns out there's a lot of benefits to having a ton of hyper-specialized sites over one single generalized site. The Ethereum vision is sort of like that in the future, instead of having one single blockchain that everyone uses, we'll have thousands or perhaps even millions of different blockchains that are hyper-specialized that all connect together seamlessly. In this vision, obviously moving between blockchains would literally take seconds and would be as seamless as moving between a website. And this concept isn't really that far off. Polygon right now is building something called the AG layer that promises to make this vision a reality. And they expect to have that fully live before the end of 2024. And when it comes to me personally, between the concept of like one big chain that supports everything and this internet of highly specialized chains, I firmly sit in the camp of this internet of highly specialized chains. I think we will have thousands or maybe even millions of really hyper-specialized blockchains that allow people to seamlessly interact and move between them. The next piece of Ethereum I want to talk about is Ethereum's layer 0, or its core security. There are projects like EigenLayer that allow other layer 1 blockchains, apps, oracles, etc. to essentially rent Ethereum security through what's called restaking. I have another great analogy from Anthony Sassano on how restaking fits into the overall picture. Ethereum's layer 0 and restaking is essentially like NATO. When a country joins NATO, they essentially get to borrow the security of all the other NATO countries. Being that if a country's in NATO and they get attacked by a country outside of NATO, all the other NATO countries are obligated to send their troops, their resources, etc. to defend that member of NATO. In the same way, other chains can rent the security of Ethereum using something like EigenLayer and restaking. This is hugely beneficial as it allows them to drastically reduce the emissions or the new tokens they're having to print to pay out to validators. For example, most Cosmos chains pay around 10% to sometimes 20% to their validators to keep them securing the network. Were they to instead use something like restaking, they could lower that from 10% to maybe 2% or 1%. That's because these validators are already securing Ethereum and they're already getting a yield that they think's worth it from Ethereum. This is just extra yield for them to opt in to secure this extra new chain. And this obviously drastically benefits Ethereum because it means more and more people are using Ethereum's core security to secure their blockchains. And it also means more and more people having to come in and stake ETH to secure these chains. So that's more ETH being bought and that's less ETH on the open market. The last piece of the puzzle when it comes to Ethereum, and maybe the single most important piece of the puzzle, is ETH the asset. Most people, in my opinion, value Bitcoin not off of the Bitcoin network, but off of BTC the asset, or Bitcoin the asset. Most people, I think, would agree that Bitcoin the network is slow, expensive, and not widely used. As a blockchain network, Bitcoin the network would probably fall behind 99% of the blockchain networks out today in terms of performance. That's why I would say that 80% of what makes Bitcoin valuable actually probably comes from Bitcoin the asset, not Bitcoin the network. Everyone views Bitcoin the asset as sort of like digital gold. They really like the fact that there's only 21 million Bitcoin that could ever exist, that 21 million hard cap. Yet when it comes to Ethereum, most people only pay attention to the tech side of Ethereum or Ethereum's layer 1 blockchain, and they hardly seem to notice ETH the asset. Yet in my opinion, ETH the asset makes a better store of value and a better form of money than Bitcoin does. ETH the asset is a yield-bearing asset. That's deflationary and widely used as money within crypto. Where Bitcoin has this hard cap of 21 million and slowly prints and issues new Bitcoin to pay miners until it hits that hard cap, ETH slowly gets smaller as the transaction fees on Ethereum's network burn more and more ETH. It'd be sort of like if Bitcoin's max supply was 21 million, and then next year it was 20 million because of all these tokens getting burned. And then the next year it was 19 million because of all these tokens getting burned. Not quite that drastic, but you get the idea. Over time, there's less and less ETH in existence as it slowly gets burned via transaction fees. Where Bitcoin has no native yield, ETH has a native yield of around 3 to 4%. And it's important to note this is sustainable yield that comes from the revenue the network generates. Where Bitcoin is primarily used as a store of value, most people just buy and hold it as a store of value or maybe a hedge against monetary debasement. ETH is widely used for an entire universe of different things. Layer 2s use it as their native gas on their network. So anytime that somebody does a transaction on a layer 2, they have to hold and pay in ETH. ETH is very commonly and widely used when it comes to yield farming and DeFi. There are a ton of different stablecoins that are building and backing themselves, either partially or even fully in some cases, with ETH the asset. And outside of that, there are a ton of different other financial products and derivatives that use ETH as a primary building block in these various different financial assets. ETH is on Ethereum, the layer 1, Ethereum's layer 2s, Avalanche, Solana, Binance Chain, and literally everywhere else. So to recap, there are 4 different pieces of the Ethereum puzzle. You have layer 0, which is used for things like eigenlayer and restaking and allows different blockchains, oracles, apps, etc. to essentially rent the security of Ethereum. You have Ethereum's layer 1, which is essentially like the Fort Knox of blockchains. You have Ethereum layer 2s, which is where all the experimentation happens, where fees are pennies. And the goal is to build an internet of blockchains that are seamless to move between using things like the AG layer and things like shared sequencing. And finally, there's ETH the asset, which is a widely used form of money that's deflationary and natively yield bearing, in comparison to something like Bitcoin, which has 0 yield, is most often just held, and is inflationary by about 1% annually up to its 21 million hard cap. And when it comes to Ethereum's layer 0, Ethereum's layer 1, Ethereum's layer 2, and the ETH the asset, not one single piece makes up the overall of what Ethereum is, but all of those things together is what makes up Ethereum as a whole. If you're interested, I have a weekly newsletter that I put out. There's a link in the description of this video. I have a podcast that I also do weekly where I dive into a lot of different projects, topics, etc. If you're somebody that's wanting to learn more about crypto, that is a great resource to learn. And if this video was helpful, make sure to hit that like button. If you have any questions or you have anything to add, let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the little bell next to it to be notified each time I release a video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.